Hey folks, and welcome back to the podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, please hit that subscribe, follow, or rate the podcast if you're listening on Spotify. We really appreciate it. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people.
It says, we will come for you. That can mean so many different things when you're talking about the fire service, right? We'll come for you, we'll rescue you out of a bedroom, whatever it might be. We will come for you because could you imagine being in a tube where you're stuck in a tube, right? A confined space thing, and you're just sitting there. They're stuck in these vehicles that will not open, they will not unlatch. Their legs are crushed. Yeah, a fire will put itself out, but nobody can get out of these vehicles without our help. So they're supposed to be grounded, theoretically is. You shouldn't get a shock, right? But my iPhone isn't supposed to die after a year either. Identifying it's a fire in an EV vehicle, this goes back to me describing to you a hybrid versus a plug-in versus a fully electric, knowing where those battery packs are. Because I can sit there and spray water all day long underneath the vehicle directly on what I thought was the battery, but then you realize it's just a hybrid and the actual batteries that are on fire are in the trunk.
That's right. Today we're talking about how to deal with incidents involving electric vehicles. Now, with an apparent ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars coming into force in 2030 in the UK, we are seeing an ever-growing presence of electric vehicles on our roads. Now, like any change, whether it's in construction, human behaviours, or in this case, transport, the emergency services have to come up with the solutions for the inevitable time when the poop hits the proverbial fan. So with that in mind, our guest today is Paul Shoemaker. He is an operational firefighter based in Colorado and is also the owner of Next Level Extrication. Paul currently serves on the ladder truck of the technical rescue team and has been in the fire service for about 14 years. He has spent 11 of those years honing the techniques of extrication and the last 5 years running his company, teaching these life-saving extrication techniques and approaches to the students of Colorado and to the East Coast. He has a strong focus on stabilization techniques and the proper understanding of lifting capabilities when dealing with struts, airbags, straps, chains, and incorporates all of this into his trainings. Since the emergence of electric vehicles, this has thrown the gauntlet down, and for many fire and rescue services across the world, they have had to develop safe and effective methods for dealing with them, and Paul has made it a priority to go elbow deep in learning and mastering an excellent understanding of the leading manufacturer of electric vehicles, which is of course the globally recognized Tesla vehicles. Now, in the early days of this creation, Paul reached out and created an opportunity to train with Tesla and help them provide informational videos teaching firefighters the proper techniques for dealing with Teslas.
So my name is Paul Shoemaker. I'm from Denver, Colorado area, just a suburb outside of Denver. I own a company called Next Level Extrication, which is has a strong focus on extrication from a stabilization perspective. That's what I focus most of my energy on. And then noticed as the years went on that we were lacking something. And what we were lacking was the future of modern vehicles, not only modern vehicles such as electric, but also just the ultra high strength steels, the way they were being built and constructed with aluminum. And then it just accelerated from there. Now, basically, my company primarily focuses on electric vehicle extrication and electric vehicle fires. And so that's the gist of my company.
I mean, the electric vehicle stuff is obviously some of the stuff we're going to come on to today, but you're absolutely right. I felt like it was like, I want to say maybe 12, 13 years ago for me personally, when we started seeing some of the different variations of the metals that were used in some of the reinforcing structures within some of the vehicles. You've been in for around 14 years, haven't you now?
Yeah, 14, probably closer to 15 now for sure. But yes, and I'm right there with you. It was around the same time frame. It was almost instantaneously when I started getting into the fire service. I was watching these changes happen so quick and nobody provided answers. They were just like, oh no, it's something wrong with the tools, or
yeah, exactly.
It wasn't.
So we started changing to like new car technology blades, and we started having some different diamond discs in some of the cutting equipment and stuff like that. But we very quickly realized that we needed to kind of build a much more open relationship with the people that are designing these structures. And I kind of feel this. I know we're going to jump off on a tangent. I always do this straight away, but I see this in like construction and everywhere, where a lot of fire services globally perhaps haven't been able to build relationships to keep up with the rapid changes. So both in like construction, when all these new buildings are getting thrown up around our sort of services, often it can be halfway through construction, we don't know anything about it. And then similarly with vehicles, there'll be loads of great innovations that are going, because at the end of the day, with the greatest of respect to car manufacturers, they are trying to make an incredible product for the end consumer. They're probably not, and I say that from a complete point of ignorance, that we are probably not the first people that cross their mind when they're putting the design of these things together, right?
I believe that too as well. When I go around and I teach classes to people, I emphasize that the manufacturers are doing a phenomenal job building phenomenal vehicles. It's that we have to learn and adapt, just like we've had to learn and adapt from legacy style construction and structure fires to modern, right? How fast they develop. We have to do the same thing with these modern vehicles coming out. They're building great things. And yeah, they're not in it for us to learn how to do it. That's our job. And
that's it.
Unfortunately, a job that I feel like we are kind of putting on the back burner a little bit. We're worried about other things rather than what the future holds for us down this path.
Yeah, and it kind of, not being harsh on any fire service or fire brigades as well, but we've kind of got this elitist view where we think they're going to just naturally present themselves to us and go, hello, fire service, we just wanted to let you know what they're not going to do that. We have got to, we've got to do what you've done. We've got to go and knock on the door and say, hey guys, look, we're really interested. What is it you're doing? How can we understand what you're doing? How can we be part of it? Because you may or may not listen to some of our suggestions, but at least when, the proverbial shit hits the fan, we're going to be the ones that are there trying to find a solution to get people out of these vehicles. So we need to be the ones that are stepping forwards there. They're willing and open. And again, we'll get onto your experiences that you've had with a number of organizations, especially the Tesla work that you've done. It's very rare that they're not willing to like have us in to learn a little bit more about it. Today's podcast was brought to you by our friends over at William Wood Watches. On the 27th of April, William Wood Watches launched their new limited edition watch, the Bronze Triumph Jubilee. This was launched to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee this year, and it's the first time ever they have produced a bronze version of their beloved Swiss-made Triumph collection. They are using specially repurposed purple hose, that's easy for me to say, and still keeping it in keeping with the bronze Swiss-made chronograph watch. There is no better way to commemorate the Queen's Jubilee with that plum violet, but of course you can get your combination of the straps as well. They've got the red, the blue, the yellow, the green. I'm sure you are all well aware of William Wood Watches. They make those incredible luxury watches from upcycled firefighting equipment. They have been with us since the very origins of the podcast, and you can find out more from them by heading over to williamwoodwatches.com. Now back to the show.
Totally. And, I actually still to this day try to get into a lot of manufacturers and tell them, listen, I'm looking to do this for the better of the good of the fire service. And I get pretty weird responses. The one that has never given me a weird response is Tesla. And so, yeah, with that being said, it's kind of like they're the only people that I have noticed that are taking a big step in the direction where they feel like if the fire service feels comfortable with their vehicles and they've provided a good way to get in them and videos to understand them, then they'll get buy-in from the fire service or fire brigade, like you said, which will then in turn make the citizens want to buy these things. And I think that's a big lack.
Yeah, it's a great sales pitch, isn't it? If you have somebody in and if they come to a road traffic collision safety evening and you go, okay, Mr. Firefighter, Mr. Fireman, whatever, what is the safest vehicle for you to get? If we've done a load of research into Tesla, for example, we know what happens when they go wrong. We know how good the safety systems are, and we can use that information as part of a public talk of some form. We're like a natural traveling salesman for these companies. So there is a tangible benefit from aligning yourself with the emergency services, right?
Absolutely. And I can tell you right now, in our fire service, we have probably 40 people who own Teslas now, and I don't know where that stems from, but it's ironic, right?
Well, I'd be the first person in the door going, hey, is there any discount? Is there a discount? What's the emergency services discount? We're constantly trying to blag a discount. So as sort of an operational firefighter, what were some of the biggest concerns? We spoke about this last sort of decade when we started learning about the electrical vehicle revolution, for want of a better description. What were some of the first things in your head that you kind of had as concerns and the first things you wanted to learn about it?
The first thing obviously was the hybrid vehicles back in the day. And a lot of it was, there was this thing where people said, well, yeah, it runs half off of batteries and it runs half off of a combustible motor.
Did you have the LPG conversions? Did you have a load of people with those?
We did.
We had loads of them.
We had those, really. We had them floating around. But I mean, it was like, we also had this thing where people were basically pouring the grease from the McDonald's from their fries into their vehicles and making these diesels out of old oil. I mean, it was we had some weird things around here, but it never took off like the hybrid took off to us.
Yeah.
but nobody knew what that hybrid was. And then when they ask like batteries, I'm like, you'd ask somebody, what kind of batteries are there? And the fire service, basically, that everybody I spoke to didn't have an answer. It was very just a blanket statement is, well, yeah, it just gives you better gas mileage. So that's kind of when it kicked in for me, was that whole comment that you hear in the fire service a lot is, that's the way we've always done it, because that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to know more about it. And then that turned into, fully electric vehicles. And at that time, when fully electric vehicles came in, I didn't even think there was a fire hazard to them, that there was something that we had to manage, that there could be this total change.
Well, we'd never seen batteries on that sort of scale before, had we? We'd seen substations and we'd seen, converters and stuff like that, but they were large scale industry. It was the first time for me. I mean, we had solar panels installed in our house, and they gave us an option for having built-in batteries so that we could, harness some of the power and use it for other stuff in the house. But back then, this was, I'm talking like 14 years ago, the batteries were really, really primitive. They weren't at the scale that they are now, so it wasn't cost effective for us to do it. But that was the first time I started thinking like, well, if this option's out there, people are going to be purchasing these, and they're going to be having these large scale battery banks in their home. And then, like you say, only a couple of years later, they were out there on the road, and these are large battery banks that are sat in these vehicles. And it's something that just kind of slipped in overnight, and we were totally unaware of.
Totally. And that is kind of where I felt the fire service going from the get-go, is how fast it was accelerating and how far behind we were. We didn't understand any of it. And now look at what we're at. In America, we just had that Super Bowl, right? But it's not the same football you could probably talk about. But there was a release of, I think, 8 fully electric vehicles or something like that in commercials just during the Super Bowl. That's how fast we're accelerating these big electric vehicles here.
Well, man, I mean, here in the UK, so at time of recording, they have still got this, and I'll get the terminology wrong, but they've got this policy or this legislation that says after 2030, we are no longer going to be selling, petrol and diesel vehicles. And I apologize if I'm incorrect on that at this time of recording, but so there is this kind of overwhelming thing that we're going to get the early adopters. People are going to try and shift over by themselves, and we'll just keep turning up the dials of pressure. And the dials of pressure for us are road tax will keep increasing. I mean, petrol has just skyrocketed again recently. It's gone up to like £1.60, and that's the highest it's ever been. I remember when it broke the £1 mark flipping years ago, and then it hit 150, and now it's just becoming crazy, and we're all kind of the subject to it. So there's so many people that are choosing to transition over, and we're going to see a massive proliferation of this already. I mean, there's probably 5 electric vehicles just on my street. We've got one as well ourselves, to be honest with you. My wife's is already on order, so we're swapping in a lot of ours, and that's why I think, like you say, that learning curve really needs to catch up and accelerate. And if we're not going to be doing it ourselves in the services, it's really vital that companies like yours are enabling people to go and like seek that learning themselves.
Totally. And one of the jobs I do with NFPA, I work with NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, which writes all of our fire codes here in the United States. And I work with them, and one of the things I'm working with them right now is vehicle adoption. So those numbers that you were shooting out is the same numbers that I've been told about UK. But our numbers are, we have states that are making that statement, individual states that are saying by 2035 you'll no longer be able to buy a combustible motor.
That's crazy, isn't it? It makes me excited, but also I'm like, wow, the economical shift that's going to cause is just ridiculous. Because I mean, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but even like mechanics, because the electric vehicles now, you have to have a goddamn laptop to get into them, and special crazy little tools. So it's going to be a whole industry shift, really.
Totally. Tow yards are going to have to know about these things because of their fire potential.
Yeah.
It is a massive change in how we function on a day-to-day basis. And that's where all of these things we're talking about now were spinning in my head at no exaggeration, probably 5, 6, maybe even more years ago. And that's what spun this whole Next Level Extrication from being solely an extrication company based on stabilization all the way to where we're at now, where I think we need to talk about techniques to cut into these vehicles are a little bit different, and how do we handle these things when they catch on fire, because they're nothing like what we've seen before.
No, I mean, we've got a recent surge at the minute I mean, people from the UK will know this. I don't know if you saw any of it. So across, especially like London, so our capital, they've got a load of electric scooters that they're really struggling with when they do catch fire. And there's been a number of domestic premises where these are stored just outside them, and they literally can't put them out. So, for example, there's two methods. One has been they just bury them, which just is ridiculous. And the other method is they actually bring these like massive pods full of liquid, and they are literally picking the vehicle up and putting it in this pod and then transporting it away, because they genuinely cannot extinguish it. Not through foam, not using water excess, not using any standard method. CO2 is not working, so they're burying them, or they're putting them in these pods of water and taking them away for storage to just burn out naturally. And so yeah, basically, I want us to zoom back for a second and just talk about some of the general challenges that we've faced with modern vehicles. We spoke about different types of infrastructure and different types of metal and stuff like that. Could we just expand on some of your experiences with the ultra high strength steel in vehicle construction and some of the difficulties that you found with that, and if there's any kind of workarounds or tips, tricks that you found that maybe you cover in some of your earlier stage of courses?
Absolutely. I think, what it entails is, obviously you have to get your hands on these vehicles, right? But when you get your hands on these vehicles with this ultra high strength steel, the cuts now don't change. The same cuts need to be made in each spot. So, for example, where they're building this ultra high strength steel is called what we refer to it as is the bird cage. So that's basically where it hits your A post, it goes up and around to your B post, your C post, comes down, and then finishes at your rocker panel. Yeah. And it makes this little cabin inside there where the pedestrians or the consumers are sitting. And that's where they build most of the ultra high strength steel, because the rest of it they want to crumble. The rest of it they want to absorb the impact.
The rest of it's sacrificial, effectively.
Correct. But one of the places what we see a huge disconnect in the old way of cutting into these vehicles versus the new is there's a thing called an upper frame rail, which basically if you pull away the front fender and you remove the sheet metal from the front fender, you see this big, thick piece of metal that goes over the top of your strut tower across the top of your wheel, if you're familiar with that.
Yes. And so we do a fender flap when we're doing when we're working in the A post, or if we're doing what we call like a dashboard lift or a dashboard roll. Part of our process is the fender flap. So we flap down that panel and just bring the outer skin of the vehicle away to allow you to access the strut that tends to sit right in front of it, like I say, right above the wheel. So sometimes you're seeing a reinforced strut that goes from wheel to wheel, almost just to the rear of the engine compartment in most standard vehicles. Is that right in saying that?
Yeah, totally. That's in the dash is what you're referring to, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that we call that a dash beam is what we call it. But yes, it's a reinforcement piece of steel that I believe, and I can't give you the exact dates. I believe it was back in 2013 and newer for most of the vehicles. They should be in almost every single vehicle, that dash beam.
Yeah. Does that
so yeah, you have
your ability to do the rolls on them, because effectively these don't bend and warp in the way if you've got a footwell entrapment or something like that, and you're trying to do a bit of space creation around the driver's feet. That's often where we would try and ram off the baseline of the vehicle off the floor pan and try and push the front of the vehicle away.
Yes, it does. All of that kind of ties in. So that upper front fender rail that goes over that basically connects to your strut tower, that's a common place right there where people aren't making a cut there, where you make your cut behind the strut tower, so closer to the A post.
Yeah,
that relieves that pressure. So when you do go to lift your dash, you have this space to separate you from the upper fender rail and that strut tower to get your lift.
Do you do two cuts there? Do you cut like a letterbox there? Sometimes we do a letterbox maneuver where we effectively try and take out maybe a 2-inch piece of steel to allow the bend, or do you just do a single cut there?
Depends on it. So it's so dynamic, right? It depends for me when I'm looking at vehicles, if we're going to do a dash roll or if we're going to do more of a dash jack or lift. If we're rolling with a ram, you may want to take a wedge out of that, because to give you that gap as that thing rolls forward.
Yeah.
Versus jacking straight up. I only usually do and intend to teach in the class that you only need to make one cut. But if that one cut isn't all the way through that upper fender rail because it's too thick, then I tell people you need to make another cut next to it so you can get your cutters deeper in there to complete the cut all the way around. So then it turns into this little wedge cut, but you're really doing that so you can get the meat of that cutter deep enough to completely cut through that upper fender.
Because I think a lot of ours, the teeth on them are probably only about 6 or 7 inches. On some of our technical rescue vehicles, you can see larger ones, but on our generic appliances, like you say, I don't think they're deep enough. You often find yourself having to make wedge cuts effectively to give you access deeper into the vehicle. Do you guys do a windscreen cut every time you ram, or do you let it naturally break and put protection in front of it? Because with a bit of variation for us over here, if we're just doing a roll or a lift, we don't necessarily manage the glass, cut it or remove it. Sometimes you just see a windscreen protector, a layer of protection with a chain on it, put down for a controlled break, but as it's doing the move. Or do you guys try and remove a lot of yours first?
No, so I'm a huge opponent of leaving glass in place. Honestly, if it breaks when it breaks. But a lot of times I don't want that stuff around the patient. It's like one of them leading causes of cancers.
Yeah, especially with the windscreen, because when it starts to fold and break, you get all the glass fibers in the air, and then it's like, whether the casualty's actually got some respiratory protection on, which is very rare, because often it's one of the last things they'll think about. Somebody will put a pair of glasses on them or something like that, but you don't often, because the paramedic will be in there, usually doing some sort of support on them anyway. They don't really they're not going to get a gas. They're not going to get a dust mask on to protect them from the fibers, really.
Totally. And what my thought is, there's a total of about 4 cuts to complete a jacking of the dash. So like if you're going straight up with it or lifting, right, that's the method where we're going straight up instead of rolling.
Yeah.
There's 4 cuts that need to be made. One is right at the upper A post, which is into the window. We do use that. And the reason we use that is because, again, it's going straight up. And if you can't go straight up if that A post is still connected into that bird cage. Because like we were talking about that ultra high strength steel, with these new modern vehicles, you have to separate those two. You won't move this thing if you don't get that bird cage to break up.
No. Or sometimes I've seen it where, like you say, they forget to do the cut at the top, and what actually happens is it starts to rip, usually at the bottom of the A post, and it starts to push the floor down rather than doing a lift, especially if people haven't got the stabilization underneath the A post, and it just becomes an uncontrolled rip. And once you start to rip the steel, it like that, I feel like it can be harder to recover from that, because the whole thing just starts to come apart.
Totally. And one of the ways to get around that I have found is, and that's, again, that ultra high strength steel. What's the weakest part? The weakest part is it's going to go to the path of least resistance, which is down. Yeah. But if you make a really wide open, so the wire loom hole, right, where the components come out of the A post and go into the door, that's the wires to control your electricity. Yeah. What I like to teach is, if you spread that hole open wide enough to get a set of cutters, just one side of the cutting blade into that A post, right, and get all the way through it, then wrap that around to the inside of the wheel well and allow it to cut not only the A post, but cut into the firewall itself. That's your first cut. If you go to the other side now and take the other side of the cutter, jam it into that hole, wrap it around to the inside of the compartment now, and cut all the way through that A post. When you go to jack that dash, what I see a lot is you don't even need to put something underneath that A post anymore, because the path of least resistance is going to shear upwards through that firewall and continue the pathward in the direction that you gave it. And I wouldn't say go do this on every single call until you're really comfortable on it. I will tell you that me personally, I hardly ever put a piece of cribbing underneath a vehicle when it's ultra high strength steel under that A post, as long as I methodically make sure that those cuts are completed. So all the way through into the firewall and all the way around that A post, and cut the top of the A post and make sure that I'm all the way through my upper fender rail behind the strut tower. I will lift that dash all day long without a piece of cribbing underneath it, and it blows straight up. But if you don't make one of those cuts correctly, you 100% might have the floor drop out on you, and now you have to put cribbing to overcome the tear and make it go in the direction you want now.
So can we just talk about cribbing for a second? Because so in our sort of 6 stages of extrication that we look at in the UK, as stabilization and sort of glass management, trim removal, looking for all of the SRS and all that sort of stuff in the vehicle, that happens very early on. And a lot of the point behind the stabilization is not only because of the physical changes we're going to make to the vehicle, but there was a big argument for a long time, and this has changed. If you look at UCRO and some of our extrication challenges that we have in the UK, they do less of this now. And what I mean when I say less of it is they're doing less pre-access stabilization, but they used to do it to stop any additional movement for the casualty effectively. So there was a massive concern about C-spine immobilization and causing further damage to the casualty. So we would, and still do in many services, put in a full 6-point stabilization on every post. And then sometimes we'll put one underneath the bonnet and one underneath the boot if we're going to be looking to take the longboard or the spine board out the back. How much cribbing do you put in place when you arrive, or what do you feel is the best way to train people? How much cribbing do you put in the initial assessments? Do you do any at all?
Yes, I do believe you got to do some. I guess the way I would get frustrated with that is that in our organization and other organizations I've seen, the cribbing is put in very lackadaisy, if that's a terminology we can use, but it's not really put in the correct places. I think if it's put in the correct places, you need 4. And the way I look at it is if you put one behind the front tire, one in front of the rear tire on both sides, well, the vehicle can't go forward or backwards, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But what happens is they'll give it a gap between the vehicle. So they'll put it underneath the vehicle, but they'll give it a 6-inch gap in front of the tire. Well, if the vehicle can get a 6-inch running start, it's like a curve. It can go up and over a curve in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I get a little bit kind of like, OCD about it when I'm teaching. And I try to tell people that with these, especially these EVs, you don't jam that cribbing up and underneath the tires. You're just allowing it to get a running start and basically overconquer your cribbing. But all I have done and gotten to the point of is just 4, one in front of the rear on both sides and one behind the front on both sides.
Okay, so you don't put anything underneath any of the posts, any of the ABC to overcome the suspension for the vehicle?
Typically what we end up utilizing is step chalk, and we'll flip those step chalks upside down, and we'll throw those onto the A-post, which is the one that they'll take and use as the one behind the front tires. That makes sense? Yeah. And it is technically behind the A-post as well, but that goes back into my theory that if that's the one that we put there to stop the car from rolling, well, then it's got a 6-inch gap to roll backwards, and it can roll probably right up and over those things with as much torque as in an EV vehicle.
Yeah.
But we're trying to solve a problem of staffing, right? You may only have 4 people on scene, and so you can only have so much cribbing in one hand.
Yeah.
But I also see that we end up rushing our extrications very quickly because we get excited and we love it. And instead of getting a good foundation built with correct stabilization, including like what you're talking about, putting stuff underneath the post and putting stuff underneath the tire, we end up just utilizing one to try to do both. And I think that's something that we're kind of lacking a little bit.
Yeah, and part of that, I mean, it's never nice to see the reduction in crewing, and we've seen a lot of it over here in the UK, but what it does force, and what I am a fan for, is the efficiencies that it causes, because it always it demands that you do more with less. So like you say before, if you could have, your incident commanders doing their 360, got somebody in on casualty care, and if you've got 3 spare people all going to do stabilization, yeah, absolutely, they're going to make it as fancy as they possibly can, and they're going to spend a few minutes doing it. But when you've just got one person, if they're trying to achieve the same level of 6-7 point stabilization with the step shocks and the crib and everything like that, they're going to be 10 minutes into the incident when there's, the cuts haven't been made, you've not started casualty care because you just haven't got an abundance of crewing. So it really forces you to think about what's essential, rather than, if I'm hearing you correctly, like some people just go into automatic mode where they're like, oh, I'm going to put the stabilization in it. But if you don't understand why you're doing it and you're just doing it because you've been told to do it, or you've been doing it because you've always done it that way, you really need to make sure you're doing the things that are going to do the most for the most in that moment, I suppose.
Totally. And that's kind of like that little frustration piece that I see, and I'm sure if you love extrication, you see those little things, but it's 100% a dynamic situation. I feel like everybody's got a judgment call they're going to have to make, and it is based on personnel, but I also truly believe it's based on the color of the patient. And when I mean color, I mean, is it green? Is it red? Is it a black patient?
Yeah.
Is it yellow? What are we dealing with? And at what point do we need to start moving into this rapid extrication and get some stabilization in, but maybe not go as in depth into our stabilization, versus maybe somebody who's a yellow patient, you can spend a little bit more time, getting that stabilization perfect the way you want it, and then making sure your cuts are a little bit better in the way that you're functioning, versus a red patient. Man, you may do just a dirty dash displacement and maybe put a little bit of cribbing and get that patient out of there as quick as possible. It's such a dynamic and involving atmosphere that you can't make that decision, I believe, until you are on scene. And that's why you got to be good at extrication, because that decision has to be made within what you find out a patient's going down the drain. You find that out 10 seconds after being on scene. And so you got to come up with a plan in 25 seconds,
Do you guys put in it? So in the UK, we're often trained with A and B plans. So you'll have your A plan, which is your perfect extrication, which is often a full roof removal and, a full spine board or long board extrication straight out the back of the vehicle, keeping the body in neutral alignment. But what we often brief the crew with first is the B plan, which is if it goes downhill fast, and you work on the B plan first. So that might be, like you say, just a dirty rip of one of the side doors, and then worst case scenario, they're just going to come straight out the side and we're just going to handball them out if they start to deteriorate very rapidly. So we'll put the B plan in place. So that'll be, a bit of stabilization in the side and get that door off. And then we will methodically move through our A plan, but always having that spine board ready at the side of the vehicle and make sure that we've handled that first. What you can see is some people getting too focused in on the A plan and then taking time removing the roof and everything like that, but they've not actually. I heard a great thing from one of our extrication champions, Bridgend extrication team. They've won it 6 times in the UK, and they say they work from the inside out, which is they'll get right in there on the casualty first and foremost and see what their entrapment is like. So if they've got a footwell entrapment, or if they are, physically trapped by their environment, what do we need to move out the way for them first, rather than spending ages on the roof and the back of the vehicle? If they suddenly need to come out the side now and you haven't already dealt with the footwell entrapment, then there is going to be no quick B plan extrication because you haven't dealt with those things. Do you guys brief an A and B plan, or how does it work from an incident commander's perspective?
I wish we would do that. That's the best I can give you. Is I wish that we had more people invested in extrication to where they want to learn these type of strategic plans, right? This is a strategic plan to me, and it's training. And just like you said it, and you nailed it to me, because here, I'll give you a synopsis here. Like when we have a crew show up on scene, it may be an engine company. An engine company doesn't carry extrication tools, but that turns into our medical group. That person's in the vehicle with the patient. I try to tell everybody, this isn't a truck company operation thing only, right? Knowing how to extricate. If your paramedic is dialed in at extrication and he's in that, or she is in that vehicle with that person, they can find out exactly what needs to be done. And the way I like to look at the scene is, I don't make the decisions. I'm a paramedic on a ladder company. And so for me, I don't want to make the decision. I should be able to come up to my medic that's in the back and ask that person and say, what do you got? What do you need? And they go, listen, full spinals, neurological deficits. They're pinned underneath the dash. I need to get them on a backboard. I need to take them out the back of this thing. I need the dash jacked. Yeah. And you go, perfect. Thanks for letting me know. I don't need to dig around in there. On top of that, your engine company can be the people who have already peeled and peaked everything before the ladder company got on scene. So really the way I wish it was trained is not only from an incident command perspective where your chief officers are coming up with an operational plan of plan A and plan B, but we should also be able to have and rely on our medics that are in the vehicle to know extrication so well that they can tell us exactly what they need to get done. And that way, that plan A and plan B may be able to be decided a lot quicker than trying to go with plan A and be like, listen, we just found out after trying to pop both doors that they're pinned under the dash. Well, we should have asked the medic.
And the medic was probably staring at that. With all due respect to the medic, if they have not done that training with you, or they haven't got an appreciation for A, what tools you've got, A, what your standard ways of working and what your methods are, they're not going to know the right terminology. And it's also the unknown unknowns. They don't know what you can't see from outside. You know, you're stood by the side of the vehicle giving instructions to your crew. You can't see in there. And you're just assuming if it's something obvious, the paramedic's going to let you know. But if they haven't got that level of training as well, that's one thing that I do like about the States is I feel like you do a lot more joint emergency services training with other systems, other police, and certainly you do a lot with your medical teams. Obviously, you have a lot of paramedics and you have a lot of EMT teams on your stations. We are still standalone fire stations in the vast majority of examples, and it's actually quite rare in my personal experiences to have paramedics and our NHS join us, and that's our fault. That's not their fault. We need to invite them more, but they're I know this is an excuse. They're so goddamn busy to ask them to come and attend training can be very, very difficult, even just to get a couple of people released to come and benefit from this.
Yeah, but like you were saying, in your organization and how that's operated, then you still have your medic in there doing their medical stuff, but then you're right. You do have to put a member in there that knows what they're doing to give it a quick down and dirty. What do you got? What do you need? You write a conditions, actions, and needs thing, right? And then pop your head out and go, this is what we got, guys. And then I do strongly agree with you to follow up with what you were saying. Yes, have a plan A and have a plan B. I have a comment that I make. I wish I could trademark it. It will never happen, but it's called the foundation of your extrication is stabilization. Okay, that's my terminology. It's on all my shirts that I have.
Love it.
The reason I say that is because it's not just about stabilization of struts. It's about everything being done correctly. And if you plan on all you're going to do is place stabilization under this vehicle because you're taking a door, and you don't plan on the fact that because it's flipped upside down, and now you have to jack the floor, right? We're not jacking the dash anymore. We're going to push the floor out as we try to create room for the dash that's crushing the person's knees, if that makes sense. Yeah. And you just put struts on there like you're popping a door. When you go to jack that floor, it's going to start lifting the vehicle, which is in turn going to make you have to tighten down your ratchets on your struts. And it's going to take you from a 70-degree angle to an 80-degree angle in seconds.
Yeah.
And so if you don't set up your extrication from the beginning, then when you come into this, you could potentially have to go backwards, backtrack, and redo it. Now, if you set up for the worst scenario, if that is it, you show up and go, listen, worst scenario is we may have to jack this dash. Well, then place those struts out at closer to a 45-degree angle.
100%.
So when you go to jack the floor, now you suck in your ratchet straps. They'll suck into an angle around where you want them to be, which is 75 degrees, 70 degrees when you're finished jacking that floor. And that's why I use that statement, because it's the same thing applies. If you don't set up your extrication for what the potential worst situation could be, then when you try to implement plan B and C, it's not going to work. Right. Yeah. It's got to be done at the very beginning.
Well, you've got to start with that end in mind. Like you say, when you have those oh shit moments, you need to have already had a plan, almost like a red team analogy of what's going to happen if this goes wrong. Even just like in basic training, like when you look at manual handling, for example. Manual handling is boring training. Everyone has to do it the first few days. But one of the first things you learn is, where are we going to go with this person if we're going to lift a casualty? What's the path like? Like if you were extricating somebody out of their bedroom, what we often do is we're going to walk the path. We're going to cut away some of the stairwell. If we have like a massive, obese person or one of our, what they call bariatrics. If we have a bariatric patient, we look at the travel path that they're going to go through. And it's the same with an RTC. We're like, when we've lifted this person out of the vehicle, where are they going to go? Okay, they're going to go over the back. Okay, well, we've got all of these doors and the roof has been sat behind the vehicle because nobody's put it over there in the debris dump in the right place. So it's having that path in mind, and like you say, starting with that in mind, so that once you've captured the load with the stabilization, when you do take the door off or when you do start to ram off the floor, you haven't got to then go back and change where your initial points of contact are or where your initial cribbing is, because you've started with the end in mind.
Totally. And that's things that I think are when you look at a class of extrication, in my opinion, it's always so focused strongly on like, let's just get down and dirty to tools. There's no method to the madness, right? Like, we have to come up with a plan.
People just want to get in there and start cutting some steel.
That's it, because that's what's the most fun. And I tell people in classes all the time, that's fine if you want to do that here because you're on a time crunch, you want to get your hands on these tools. But when you go back and you train with your crews, that you got to implement scenes and actually run them like the real deal. Run them with an incident command structure. Run them with a scenario where you have to try to pull something out of a door. Or a lot of times what I'll do is I'll flip cars, crush them so hardcore that it's hard to get into. And I'll say, listen, your evolution isn't done until you can displace the brake pedal. When you can displace the brake pedal, well, then that tells me you've gotten enough room in there where you could take care of the worst situation with a person trapped in that vehicle.
Today's episode is supported by our good friends over at Duty Crew Coffee. Now, as you're probably aware, coffee is the most popular drink worldwide, with over 2.25 billion cups of coffee consumed every single day, and over 70 million of those in the UK alone. Most of this is consumed in our crew rooms, our watch offices, and by our emergency services frontline staff. So when you're getting together around the mess table, don't be drinking a nasty ass cheap coffee. Nobody likes that guy that brings the cheap stuff. Life is too short to be drinking crap coffee. So if you head on over to dutycrew.co.uk or click the link in the podcast below, you'll be able to jump on over and see the Duty Crew coffee products. They come in 227 gram oversized high quality recyclable standard pouches, and they are individually wrapped 10 gram coffee bags. They're quick, mess free, convenient. They have a one-way degassing valve, which is an absolute must for storage of freshly roasted coffee. You can get the 20-pack response bag. They've got the HQ, they've got the No Duff, they've got the Unity, the Decaf, and of course all of their products are Rainforest Alliance certified, Fair Trade Foundation, and most importantly, they taste freaking epic. I started drinking Duty Crew about 2 months ago, and then when I fell in love with it, I got in contact with them and they came on board with the podcast. So jump on over to Duty Crew Coffee if you want some of the good stuff. Now back to the podcast. I think with road traffic collisions especially, it's a real test of a crew's ability, because when it comes to fire, every single fire I've ever been to is not burning anymore. And that's not because I'm a good firefighter. It's because eventually it's going to go out. Do you know what I mean? Eventually, if you leave something for long enough, it's either going to burn everything around it or it's going to go out of its own accord. A road traffic collision is not going to resolve itself. You are going to have to be the solution to that problem. So you can't keep just, passing time or fiddling about with different techniques. You really have to have a strategic, systematic approach to the incident, because it can't just be, we did this and we did that, and then eventually it just burns out. That person is going to, it will end with them eventually dying if you're there for, a considerably long period of time. But that's what I think is so unique about extrication and about the work that you do, is because it forces people to really master their skill sets, because there's no hiding when you're on a job like that.
Totally. It's funny you said that, because in another quote I have on the back of my shirt, it says, "We will come for you." That can mean so many different things when you're talking about the fire service, right? We'll come for you, we'll rescue you out of a bedroom, whatever it might be. But my thought is exactly that. We will come for you, because could you imagine being in a tube where you're stuck in a tube, right? A confined space thing, and you're just sitting there. How are you going to get out of there? You're stuck in a tube. There's no way to get out.
Yeah.
Somebody has to remove you. Well, these people are stuck in tubes. They're stuck in these vehicles that will not open. They will not unlatch. Their legs are crushed. So who's going to get them out? Well, we're the only people that have tools that have been provided to us by these manufacturers to get people out. And so therefore, like you said, which I love that you said it, is, a fire will put itself out. But again, nobody can get out of these vehicles without our help. And I still, with that being said, think that so many people put extrication on the back burner as if it's something where we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah.
But that's not what we promised in the fire service. We promised that we will come for you. We promised that we would get you out. And when we show up, there's nobody else there that's going to come up with a plan. We're the only people. It's not like you can phone a friend, a Jeopardy or whatever, who wants $1 million.
Yeah, because I think as well, there's so many things when you go to an extrication where once let's say there's nowhere to hide, but also you've got to be able to come up with a solution quick enough as well, because the time will run out for that individual eventually if you don't have something in place as quick as you get there. And so often you get to a job where you need to be able to rely on the people around you, but we're going through such a massive recruitment drive in the UK now where people are coming into the job that have never been to any of these incidents before. So it's such a fantastic opportunity for us to get back to these fundamentals, and that's why I'm interested in some of the things we're going to discuss today, because firefighters who have been in for 10 or 15 years will think that these fundamentals are, just so basic it's not worth going over again. But we'll have an opportunity now to drag everybody back to the basics, because I think it's the basics that often a lot of people slip up on as well.
Well, and nowadays the basics is totally different than what we've always thought it's been.
Exactly.
Right? The basics now is ultra high strength steel and high voltage cables, right? So when we're I do a class called Back to Basics, the fundamentals of extrication. And when we're going back to the basics now, this isn't like, well, you're teaching me beginner level stuff. No, it's not. You have to redevelop why you're cutting and why you're spreading where you're spreading now because of the ultra high strength steel or because of these high voltage cables or the lithium ion batteries. So it's so important for everybody, no matter where you're a 2-year guy or a 25-year person, to take this course. Because I'll tell you, in my true belief is the firefighters that are coming out right now, they're growing up with this vehicle in their mind versus all of the individuals that have been on the job for a long time. They're having to transition from the old way we used to do something to where that doesn't work anymore. We have to do something different. And we have to be humble enough to say to ourselves, just because I've been on a job for 30 years doesn't mean I can't listen to a dude that's been on a job for 2.5 years, because he may actually know something since he's training on this new stuff way more than I am.
And he's going to have the most up-to-date stuff. Like I said, he's been through the latest iteration at their training school of exactly what's relevant now, not what used to work 10 years ago. You mentioned there about high voltage cables. So I want to drag us back into the world of electric vehicles. Talk to us about the placement of these high voltage cables, what sort of voltages we're dealing with, and where sort of the battery banks are located and isolations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So the trick is that, and I guess the broad statement would be, where is the cables running? I would say everywhere until they're determined not to be there.
Okay.
And that's the way I have to look at every extrication now. Is we used to just peel and peek the inside, peeling and peeking for cylinders and airbags. And now I try to teach that you can't rule out that you can make a cut until you've actually put your eyes around that entire area that you're cutting. And that's because we're starting to see some of these high voltage cables run actually behind the strut tower of the front of the vehicle, in the inner side of the A post, down into the rocker panel, through the rocker panel, and dispersing through the battery packs underneath the vehicle.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, because before a lot of the cabling was so small, because obviously it was just for electric windows and airbags and stuff like that they would just bolt it onto the frame and sort of clip it to the structure itself. But because of sometimes the size of these high voltage cables, and because the vehicle was originally designed to be an electric vehicle, like I said, it's actually inside the struts themselves.
Totally, absolutely, and they're in. Yeah, they're not necessarily what I say they chase through your A post, but they definitely can chase through your rocker panel, to where if you were doing any sort of cut to jack the floor on a car that's upside down and make a cut into that rocker panel, and you haven't determined that it's what kind of vehicle it is yet, you could find yourself in a real bad situation. And that's why that type of maneuver almost has to be taken out of your as a textbook deal, trying to jack the floor, making a cut into that rocker panel, because you can't determine if it's in there. If it says EV, you might as well just assume that it's in there.
Yeah.
And to just blind cut something anymore is, to me, is a very risky move to make, where we might have to just alter our path and do a different move that we can absolutely do and get the same job done.
So talking about the floor panels themselves, The battery makeup on some of these, because some electric vehicles, the majority of the floor panel is now battery. Tell me what the crack is with some of the floor panels. How much of these can be made up of batteries now, and what's the locations of these things?
Yeah, so this is the crazy part when I try to teach my classes is understanding what the difference between a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, and a fully electric vehicle. It isn't about anything about the combustible motor or how many miles it has to me. What those vehicles, when I look at a hybrid versus a plug-in versus a full EV, what that does to me is tell me exactly where their batteries are placed. And it gives me a rough idea also of how many batteries are in place. So if it's a hybrid vehicle, you're going to be in the lower numbers of lithium ion batteries. I don't have an exact number for you, but let's just say 1,000 batteries in a hybrid. In a plug-in hybrid, you're going to have closer to 2,000 to 3,000 batteries. So that location has to change to be able to support that many batteries. And then fully, when you have an EV, full EV, you're going to have 6,000 to 10,000 batteries. So now your location's changed. With that, go ahead.
I was just saying, I didn't realize there'd be that many.
Yes. Yeah. Your Tesla has 6,000 to 8,000 batteries in it. Your standard Tesla, lithium ion batteries. Yes. And so when I look at that and I do an identification process when I arrive on scene and I see something that says hybrid, I can pretty much assume that if it's just a hybrid, the batteries are going to be located in the trunk, underneath the rear seat, or behind the rear seat, actually upright.
Okay.
If I look at a plug-in hybrid, because now we're maybe 2,000, 3,000 batteries, those ones run a lot further on electricity, so that's why they need more batteries. Those are going to have a little bit of a harder time supporting that in the back of a trunk. What they end up doing is putting it on the floor. But when you look at a full EV vehicle, where do they put all of those 8,000 batteries? They put them on the floor as well. But when they put them on the floor, they put them underneath the vehicle, underneath the seats. And the reason they can do that is because there's no drive shaft. So if we jump back to a plug-in hybrid still has a lot of batteries they have to support, but you have a drive shaft now. They have to put those batteries typically underneath the seats, but inside the vehicle, because you still have all the electronic components that go along with a combustible motor running underneath. So there's that difference in how the vehicle is built. So that's a lot of when I'm identifying these vehicles and looking at these batteries and everything and their placements of them, it's all based off of what style of EV it is, hybrid versus plug-in versus fully electric.
So when we've made that differentiation, and I know in the UK we have a lot of like mobile data terminals, so these will have banks of information about all the vehicles out there, and you can just bring up 3D imagery of the vehicles, and you can remove layers, you can remove the roof, the boot, and all this sort of stuff, and it should, if they're working, it should give you the locations of those batteries and the numbers of these. I wanted to move on to shutting them down. So let's assume for a second it's not involved in fire, but we're trying to make the vehicle as safe as possible for us to carry out these cuts and complete the extrications and hopefully not deploy any further airbags or anything like that. What is some of the methods and the pros and cons for each of shutting down vehicles, both from just a standard 12 volt all the way up to the high voltage?
Yeah, totally. So right off the bat, your target is to shut both of them down, right? If we shut down the high voltage, well, we still have low voltage, and low voltage is a concern to us because that's still our airbags. But our high voltage, by shutting down our high voltage, which we can talk about here in a second on how we do that, all you're doing is stopping that connectivity, right? You're basically just taking the breaker, if we look at like a breaker box on the outside of a structure, and you're just removing that breaker, or you're just turning it to off. You're not allowing that circle to keep going around and around and around. But with that being said, that doesn't stop the fact that there is copious amounts of electricity still being stored, not only in some of the lines, but also the batteries themselves. The energy is still there. We didn't remove the energy. We just stopped and hopefully slowed down the electricity inside those cables. But we don't know if the components that are supposed to allow backdraw of electricity through those cables is working. So therefore, if we shut it down and we assume that all cables now are no longer active and we cut one, there is always going to be a potential that you could receive a shock from that. And the mechanics that I
what sort of level of shock were people receiving from these sorts of things? Is it going to be fatal, or is this something that is just going to give you a nasty surprise?
I try to preface this a lot, right? These manufacturers are awesome at their job. I mean, every one of them knows exactly what they're doing. They know that these things could get in a wreck. They could touch metal. They could shear open. Somebody could cut them in the fire service. They know all that. So they're supposed to be grounded. So really, theoretically, is you shouldn't get a shock, right? But we can't assume that in the fire service. So we're just going to, for the viewer's perspective, yes, to answer their question, 100%, it's supposed to be grounded. But my iPhone isn't supposed to die after a year either. And it dies a year later, right? Yeah. So that just gives you a perspective on what electronics can do. But with that being said, if you were to receive a shock, it's about 90 to 100 amps of electricity, which broken down into milliamps is about 100,000 milliamps. And anything over 10,000 milliamps would put you into instant cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
If that can give you an idea of how much electricity is behind there.
A quick reminder for all of our listeners of our monthly giveaway. Now, as part of our partnership with HAIX, Rosenbauer, and Tallyman, we give away that little bit extra to our podcast listeners every single month. You can get 2 personalized BA tallies. These are hardware, and they've got your own name, they've got your own service number on them, and they have the podcast logo on the back. And then for the juicy stuff, HAIX give away a pair of their incredible footwear. And some of the stuff is pretty expensive stuff, to be honest with you. We try and switch it and change it every month. We are guided by the gods of HAIX to make sure we are giving you exactly what you need for that time of year. So it might be boots, it might be trainers. And then once every quarter, our good friends over at Rosenbauer are giving away their Boris B5 firefighting boots as well. So to be in with a chance to win, jump over to our social media platforms or YouTube, where you need to tag a member of the emergency services in the post, be following our page, and you will be in with a chance to win at the end of every single month. Back to the show.
So it's not something we want to be messing about with. So when we look at isolating these, the isolation points, a lot of people will still be drawn to the bonnet. You know, we'll be in that old mindset of try and find the battery. You do find with a lot of vehicle manufacturers, they have tried to stick with that simply for the familiarity that we have with what we expect to be the generic location for a standard battery. And sometimes you see a large orange cable coming into the front of the vehicle underneath the bonnet area, which I know for some electric vehicles acts as their boot. But where are the best places for us to be going for the safest and easiest way, rather than making any cuts ourselves? There usually is a breaker that we can just pull off, or you know, a button that we can hit.
So yeah, there is a breaker in them. There's actually a main disconnect in all EVs, but that is like pulling a gas meter, and it's something that the manufacturers, and when you talk to the engineers, they say that is for mechanics only, and to not even go near that thing. But what they do have is a first responders cut loop, is what it's kind of been classified as at this point.
Yeah.
Tesla's the one that really came up with this name. Obviously, they're the leading manufacturer in support for the fire service. So they came up with it first, which again, we love them for this type of stuff. But what I would tell you they also did, which will help you find this first responders cut loop, is when you open the hood of a vehicle, almost instantaneously, right where the hood or the trunk, I guess you could call them, whatever, they latch, is usually a sticker with a fire helmet on it. And it tells you right there, either on a picture and or just in description, of what you need to do to shut down the high voltage system. It will show you and guide you right to what you need to do. That's kind of the bread and butter that I've seen in most of these EVs, which is a huge support for us. But again, it's like you said, they do place them where they know we need to go to shut down the batteries in the past. They're trying to put it in the same area because of their knowledge of our process.
And they're going to need to do that for probably at least another 15 years before we've had the retirement of everybody that was just used to that conventional way of looking at some of these vehicles. So when we come to one, and heaven forbid it's on fire, people glance at the back of it, they see it's a Tesla, or they see the green sticker on the number plate, on the license plate, and they know that it's an electric vehicle. do we need to be changing gears at all? What do we need to be considering in terms of extinguisher medias, in terms of thermal runaway? What are some of the things that we need to have in our heads?
You guys in UK and the Netherlands, all those people out there are actually probably seeing more of these and getting their hands on them way more often than we are. But with that being said, it is a dynamic change from the get-go. The process for maybe one organization may be different from the other based on manpower, based on what they have as supporting rigs. And so it depends on where you're operating at and what you have accessible to you. But your plan should automatically change. And one of those plans is when you identify it, identifying it's a fire in an EV vehicle. This goes back to me describing to you a hybrid versus a plug-in versus a fully electric, because where your change happens is knowing where those battery packs are. Because I can sit there and spray water all day long underneath the vehicle directly on what I thought was the battery, but then you realize it's just a hybrid and the actual batteries that are on fire are in the trunk and it's not underneath the vehicle. So the tactics change almost instantaneously, but you have to be able to take a step back, look at what kind of vehicle you have, identify the locations of where these batteries are, and then also follow that up with how much manpower am I going to need? Because if this is just a hybrid, I might be able to knock this thing out with one pumper and maybe a water supply. If it's a plug-in hybrid, I may need another water supply and maybe some extra personnel because we may be here for a little while. Versus if it's a fully electric vehicle, depending on where you are, whether you're rural in an area that doesn't have water supply, or depending if you're on the middle of an interstate, you may need rigs to block for you because now you got potentially hours of sitting on scene. And so right off the bat, when you identify these things, that's that incident command structure where you have to know what's coming down the pipeline, how long are you going to be working on this scene, how much water do you need, and a lot of that is determined by what kind of vehicle you're dealing with.
I love that when you think about, because you spoke before about the misconception of sort of water usage and the amount that's going to be required, and it does come down to application. We've done a lot of work in the past with the CFBT instructors and talking about the correct applications per sort of kilowatt and whatnot of energy that you need to try and dissipate from heat to fire and all that sort of stuff, and having correct application of that is effectively the best way to be most efficient with the resources that you've got. I did want to ask you about, we've spoken in and around the lithium batteries a little bit there, and I know it's somewhat of an unknown topic for a lot of people, myself especially still, but there is some big concerns about sort of the gases that they give off and the reports that you have about stored and enclosed spaces, and why we are seeing sometimes, and there's plenty of videos out there on Instagram for people to have a look at, where they are having sort of explosive behaviors in garages and stuff like that. Is there anything you can expand on for us with that? Have you had any experiences yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I have not had experiences, but I work for UL, and it's a research industry that basically determines how we even create light bulbs here in the United States. It's got a little U and an L on the bulb because they're the ones that determine the safety behind it, right? I work.
How the hell have you got into all these organizations? I love that, man. You must be just getting after it all the time to be, with all due respect, you're a guy from a local fire brigade and you're getting some access to some incredible national companies. It's a real compliment to the work you must be involved in, the work you must be doing.
I appreciate that, and humbly I do appreciate it. And I'm religious, and so for those people who care, I'm very blessed. That's all I can say. To be in the position I am and get to know the people that I've gotten to know, and I hope to continue that. But I'm very passionate about this, and I think that shows in my work. And I think that's what I would say.
I'm not non-religious, but I would certainly lean more towards the fact that, it's the old saying when the guy goes up to the guy with a beautiful garden and he says, "Oh, so you've got a blessed garden. God has blessed you with this garden." And he's like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. The soil and the sand and the rain and stuff like that. But you know what? You should have seen what it was like when God had it all to himself." So what I'm saying by that is you have taken these opportunities. You know, you've obviously been blessed with the people you've been able to meet, but like you say, you do have an incredible passion for it. And it's the whole chicken and egg scenario. People can sometimes say that I don't get the right opportunities, but you get a hell of a lot more opportunities when you lean in with the sort of passion that you demonstrate in the work that you do.
Totally. And I appreciate that, you know, but yes, it's a lot of hard work, and I think hard work pays off in life. And this is just an example of it for me. And so, yes, it's been a great ride, and I hope to, again, continue it and continue to learn more, because I think we are touching a fraction of what is to come, definitely in the United States. But like you said, even in UK, when you're talking 2030, that's a huge change to have vehicles no longer be able to be sold.
It's not very far away. It is not very far away.
Not at all.
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you about lithium batteries.
No, you're fine. It kind of ties into it though. So this company that we work through has a bunch of engineers that create these scenarios, and when they create these scenarios, they're doing it right. I mean, they're getting meters in there. They're reading gases. They're reading the reactions. Their thermal imaging cameras are introduced. All of this stuff. And so, what I can tell you is that 100% these vehicles. And it's not even vehicles. Let's just say lithium ion, because this is a scooter. This is stored energy panels that are in your garage. This is a car battery. These are all contained to be the exact same style of battery and react the
these
same
are just
way.
absolutely everywhere now. You know, even just in my diving torch, you know, that's got a pretty substantial lithium battery now, and the charging mechanisms for it, they're all over our house, and you just don't realize how quickly they become part of your day-to-day life.
Correct. And so what happens when these batteries go into what we use the term called thermal runaway? It's kind of stored energy / thermal runaway, right? What happens is whatever has created this battery to be volatile, it starts to heat up and go into a thermal runaway. And so maybe what we can say right off the bat is if these vehicles have a battery temperature range of up to 200 degrees, well, they'll stay within that 200 degrees. When they have had something irritate them and they break loose of that 200 degrees, that's technically where we've gone over this hill and we're now into a thermal runaway. Some of these batteries have ignition temperatures of 325 degrees, 475 degrees, and 550 degrees. So from 200 degrees to, we'll give the 550 degree number, they're in a thermal runaway. And when they're in a thermal runaway, what they're doing is they're off-gassing. And whether it's a stored energy system or it's an EV, they have venting systems built into them. They try to vent out to cool themselves down. But the heat can be too excessive for it to cool itself down, so it continues to vent. It may vent for 1 day, it may vent for 1 hour, it may vent for a week. And if it's venting inside a closed environment, such as a garage, you can get gases to fill up inside that confined space and have nowhere to go. Now, the gases that they're seeing come out of it is hydrogen fluoride and carbon dioxide, right? And they're having a bunch of different gases, but these are the big ones. Well, hydrogen fluoride comes out and roughly at about a 10% range and fills the environment, and hydrogen fluoride is extremely explosive. I mean, a very, very explosive gas. And then you have carbon dioxide, which is a oxygen deficient atmosphere. So you're pushing out at 16 to 20% of carbon dioxide.
Is hydrogen fluoride, does that have a scent to it, hydrogen fluoride? Is that one stinks? Is it not, or is it scentless? Because obviously carbon dioxide, there's no scent to it. But
yeah, I don't know that answer for you. That one I don't
think it is. So for example, the reason I ask is I was around a friend of mine's the other day, and we went hiking in the Lake District, which is a really beautiful place in the UK. And we did this about 6 months ago, and we were talking about doing it again. And he said, you know what, dude, I've not even aired out all my kit from the last time that we went. So we were around there, and I said, well, let's just, whatever, we'll just get it all out and we'll just have a chat and whatever. I went into the garage and started unpacking some of his stuff, and he had the big head torches with the lithium batteries in it, and it had melted through one of the compartments in the back of his rucksack and completely just destroyed his rucksack. And it was still like really freaking hot. It was hot to touch, and it completely melted the head torch. And that had lithium batteries in it then. And it did stink, but I think the stink was the smell of the plastic. It had melted all the plastic. But I thought to myself, I was like, Jesus, what if this had been, a day later, or it was just blind luck that we were around there discussing going away again. And he was like, mate, I've not even got my kit out. And I was like, well, let's just do it. And he was literally there. It was hot and the bloody plastic was melting. I was like, Jesus, this is going to bloody caught fire tonight.
Well, no, to add into that, right. I have been on a call where I had somebody with an investigation. It was an odor investigation. And I looked around this whole house with an entire crew of people, firefighters, and we looked for almost 45 minutes and couldn't find what it was. We thought it was the sewage coming up. We thought it was rotten food. We didn't know what it was. It was the most weirdest, disgusting smell I've ever smelled. I just couldn't figure out what it was. And the long story here is that, make it short, I ended up using a thermal imaging camera, and I found something hot upstairs in a closet. When I opened it, it was one of those lithium ion battery packs that you charge, and then it has an outlet on it so you can charge things. It's portable. I don't know if you kind of have those out there.
Like battery banks,
The thing was, and it's just something for people to do camping or whatever they want. And it was at like 290 degrees. It was so hot you couldn't touch it without your gloves on. And it was just sitting upstairs, and the guy happened to be a pilot and had just got back into town from work. And that's why he called us when he walked in and he smelt that. But if that thing, two things, that would have ignited, it would have burned his house down. And two, the smell was weird. I just don't know how to put it to words as to what it smells like, whether that's hydrogen fluoride or not. I don't have that answer for you. I know when lithium is burning, and igniting and getting hot, it smells weird. I know that much.
Yeah. So when it is gassing off, we talk about this highly explosive environment. What sort of the work that you're doing with these companies? How are they looking to either overcome that, or what's the solutions that we've got?
Well, that's where we're at, I guess, now, right? Is there an answer for it? I couldn't give you the correct answer because research is still happening. We're so new into where this is going. All I can tell people is that the reaction of something where you're putting 10% hydrogen fluoride into an atmosphere of a garage with 20% carbon dioxide and taking oxygen away, and you walk up to a garage for a smoke investigation is what it would probably get called in as, and you see smoke, what you think is smoke, it happens to be gas, leaking out from underneath the garage, and you go ahead and take your saw to cut open your garage door so you can get access to this fire, or you go interior, you go up to the garage door and you go to open it, and now you introduce a massive rush of oxygen into this environment. The explosive behavior that you could see would not only blow, it needs to release somewhere, right? It's either going to blow through the house or as you make that cut into that garage door, it finally gets its air. It's going to blow that garage door straight off in 200 feet, and you're standing in front of it. So the one thing I can encourage everybody is, how are we going to overcome this? I would treat it a lot like a backdraft. And if you think about a backdraft in a residential structure, we are trained to, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this is different, we're trained to ventilate high, right? Go cut a hole in the roof, let it ventilate high. That way we don't get that pressure to release out the front door.
Yeah, so we call it tactical ventilation. I know you do a lot of vertical ventilation, but we will look to either create a port or using like a ceiling hook or something. We will break glass from a distance and allow sort of a higher level vent as much as we can. Then we can even introduce positive pressure ventilation. So we've got fans and stuff like that to try and dissipate any unburnt products of combustion, which is effectively what we're talking about there, and try and bring out that lower explosive limit.
Totally. And that's probably the best answer. But where I have this hiccup, and what I'm, on this panel that I'm with UL, I'm only one of like 4 firefighters doing this. The rest of them are all engineers. And so this is one of the questions I have, is how do we handle it? But my thought is, well, what's typically above a garage in a single family dwelling, right? Is it an exposed, and this may be different in your area. In our area, it is not a garage with just a roof above it. It's a garage with a living space above it.
Yeah.
So
we often have the extension spot on the side of the house will have bedroom upstairs with an ensuite, and then you'll have the garage downstairs.
Totally. So how do you and my thought is, how do we vent above the garage, a vent high, if that's living spaces, which we're trying to protect the people that are up there. And that's where it gets to be like, how do we dissipate this gas without opening any door? Because if you open a door or open a garage, you're releasing the oxygen too quickly and could cause a massive explosion. So is adding a fan there and trying to push the fan air through the gaps in the garage door going to help dissipate it? So when you open up the door, it doesn't have as much pressure. You know, those are the things that we're trying to test and figure out. But the
we would
severity
likely, if we had the knowledge of where the situation was, and like you say, the fact but like you say, it's been able to identify early enough. So if we had gas detection off and stuff like that, if it came in as a smell, I would like to think that crews would get off the appliance with gas detection. So hopefully they would be able to pick up as they approach the property that there is a certain elevation of a certain type of gas in there, and then that should hopefully shift their mindset. But if they get a thermal imaging camera and they're seeing a rise of heat in the garage, they're going to have to make entry somewhere. Off the top of my head, I would probably say you'd go internally from the door that enters into the garage from the inside, because it would allow you to do progressive door entry procedures and try and create a healthier balance in there, where you put in fire suppression in there and you're slowly introducing a balance of gas and try to make it a better level. And it'd just be a very long process to do it safely, I think.
Totally. And here's some I'm going to throw out there, and you can tell me what you think, because this is the cultural change I'm trying to make in the fire service currently right now. Is you just spoke about it, and that was if you knew what you were getting yourself into. And so for me, when I go around and teach this electric vehicle fire course, one of the main slides I have, and I think I implement it multiple times throughout my PowerPoint, is dispatch. And I say it, dispatch, 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 because how helpful would it be for the fire crews to be en route and already know this? And how easy is it for dispatch to say, hey, listen, you got a weird smell in your house? They're like, yep. And they go, okay, do you have any stored energy in your garage, or do you have an electric vehicle in your garage?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. I mean, that can just trigger us right away to be set up for, okay, hey, listen, we're going to this smell, guys, and we got reports the homeowner says that there's EVs in the garage and stored energy. So let's start with that, but let's do a slow, methodical approach to that and make sure we do it safely. And I mean, what that relies
on is the crews feeding all of that back to dispatch, or as we would look at it in the UK, we call them control centers. So like you say, because all they're doing is they're dispatching the crews to the best of their knowledge for the incident that they've had reported to them by a member of the public. But for them to have a more tangible link between what's being reported and what the crews are finding on the ground, that relies on us, doing that follow-up piece of saying, look, you gave us this call, this is what it came in as, this is what it actually was, and this is what we learned from it, because then it empowers our dispatch call handlers to be asking the more sort of revealing questions that are going to really empower the crews to make the right decisions in how they approach the incident.
Totally, that's spot on. I mean, that's exactly, and that's the cultural change that I think we need to start looking at now to help us further down the road, right? Because
I'd love to see, right? Sorry to interrupt again. Is to have dispatch members, and I know this is difficult with the limited crews and stuff, actually come and do ride-alongs. I know we've seen it happen a few times, but I haven't seen one in many, many years. And I appreciate we've just been through COVID, but to have our control call handlers come and sit on an appliance and actually be able to ride out on calls would be really valuable to them, to see what we actually do, what our thought processes are, because there'll be things that they will see in their head that will give them the right sort of questions to ask the caller when those calls are coming in. But again, that relies on having people to release and having enough crew and all that sort of stuff.
I agree with you. I agree with that. If they could implement that, even would be nice. In our organization, we don't really get that, dispatchers wanting to ride along. But I think you're right. If they could see a lot of what we would do, not even just electric vehicles and stored energy fires, things like that, it would be good for them to globally see what we do. But in our organization too, we get a dispatcher for maybe 6 months and then they quit and leave and another one comes in. So, you would need the person to stick around.
Is it that quick of a turnover over there?
I think it's pretty quick. I may be exaggerating quite a bit there, but it may be a year. It's not. Wow. It's not.
Are they
looked at
considered
as
part of the fire department? Are they employed by the same organization? Because all of our control staff are part of our organization. They're considered non-operational staff, but they get paid quite well and they get pension schemes, and they're part of our organization. We consider them, well, they are. They're the same as what we are. They're a vital part of our crew. Is it the same over there, or do you have the same dispatch for all services, as in police, fire, medical? Is it just the same dispatchers?
In our organization, we got the same dispatchers. We have a police side and a fire side. They sit in the same building, but they're employed by the city. And then you have other places, large city fire departments around us that do the same thing kind of as us, but they do rotations, and their firefighters will go up in dispatch and actually dispatch their crews, and they rotate them through, which is great. And then you have some that work for the organization, period. And so they're their own dispatching company. And yes, they are part of that organization. So we kind of have no uniformity. It's kind of the choice of the organization, whether they want to employ them as part of the department or they want to keep them as a city employee. It's different for each place.
Yeah, which will make it difficult, to have those people wanting to lean in more if they feel like, they could be on another job in 6 months, or they could be working under the department next year. Like you say, it might not be within their power to make those kind of decisions, which would be challenging. I love that, man. We've covered so much ground there in terms of the electric vehicle stuff. Before we close, I did just want to move on to some personal questions, just to really capture a little bit around yourself. Because I always say, when people are looking to engage in this type of training, it's great to get an understanding of the sort of person. So what made you want to first join the fire department? You've been in for 14, 15 years now. What made you want to do it in the first place?
Oh man, that's like a straight up interview question that I dread trying to answer. Honestly,
sit you down, Paul. Why did you want to join the fire department? Yeah,
I don't want to give you the cliche answer because it's kind of a little bit true, but I would tell you that growing up in my lifestyle, I was really good at sports. I would say decent. I wasn't good at pretty much any educational thing I wanted to do. I could never get good grades. I felt like I was never going to achieve anything, but I was a mechanic. I did a lot of hands-on stuff. I owned my own landscaping business. And when I found the fire service, found out about it. There was two things I liked. It was very physical. I love physical fitness. I work out probably 5 days a week, and I thoroughly enjoy fixing things myself, right? Like, and there's not a lot of jobs that allow you to do that, where you are getting in the down and dirty every day, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, you find a job that you don't have to sit at a desk for, and it's not repetitive. Every day is a different day to me. And with my past history of having ADD and ADHD, it was kind of like one of those places where I just felt like I could finally excel at something. All these years of being told, you're not good at school or whatever it might be. I would go take a course for the fire service at the very beginning, and I would get an A plus, and I've never had an A in my life.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like I found something that mentally I knew I was so vested in that I was doing good at. And it just kept going. It was like I took this class. The next thing I know, I'm like, I know for a fact this is where I want to work. I know for a fact this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's the real answer of that.
And that's honest. I think you find that with a lot of people, certainly with myself as well. I think a lot of people that are attracted to the fire department are kinesthetic learners. We like to do things with our hands, and we like to be able to see a tangible connection between what we're doing and the outcome of it. There is very few jobs now where you don't find yourself pinned every day monotonously to a computer, or even if you are out doing something physical, sometimes it can be the same. I worked in factories and stuff before I came into the fire department, and there was very little variation day to day. It was designed to be efficient and systematic. So you go in and you'd be doing the same stuff every single day, because that's what a lot of capitalist style organizations and factories and stuff like that, that's where the efficiency is. but you do see people that have that different a different mindset being drawn to the emergency services, because effectively you're a master problem solver. You've got a limited set of tools with you, and you've got a problem to fix, and it's going to require your own sort of creativity and innovation to come up with a solution to it, because every single time it's going to be a little bit different.
It totally, and it just makes you feel like you've accomplished something every day. That's the other thing. Most jobs, you can go years before you feel like you've done anything.
Yeah.
And every day I feel like I go home, I'm like, man, I got a ton done yesterday. I accomplished all these things. And that's, in a nutshell, that's the day in the life of a firefighter is. You get to work and don't stop working until you go home. And that's something you can't find anywhere. That's pretty much me. And that's pretty much where I come from with that stuff.
So we're talking a lot about different changes here. We're talking about changes in vehicles. We're talking about changes in the way that we learn and respond to incidents and stuff like that. I wanted to ask you about sort of change in general. And when we look at responding to incidents in the fire service and how the fire service is changing, what would your response be to firefighters that are, struggle with this kind of change? The irony of a lot of firefighters is they don't like the way things are and they don't like change. So they can be a tough crowd to please sometimes. But we're going through a hell of a lot of change now. We've only spoken about vehicles here today, but the role of the firefighter is continuing to develop and change over time. What's your advice for people dealing with change?
Really, I think you have to look back at why you wanted to work in the fire service, right? And you wanted to make change to somebody's bad day, right? That's what we got in the fire service for, is I want to fix something that's wrong for somebody else, whether it's a medical problem or a structure fire, and I want to put the fire out for them. It's our duty to make change for the individuals that are driving this car. And when they're driving that car, they put all the faith in you, like we talked about earlier, to get them out of it if they're stuck. And or if their car is on fire that's in their garage, for you to be able to put it out before it burns their house down. And humbly, you have to remember that 30 years ago is not the same thing we're dealing with today. And Absolutely. People that are coming to the fire service now may have things to offer that you have to just respectively listen to, because it might be the right way. And in that right way, it might save your life, because it is going to teach you to not go pop that garage door like we've always done it. Yeah. When you find out that hydrogen fluoride's behind it and that thing blows 200 feet off and takes your head off, right? I mean, that's a over exaggeration, but that true. One maneuver could save your life.
Absolutely. When you look back at when you first started now and all the experiences that you've had, if there was one sort of piece that you wish you had known when you started the fire department, what would that be?
Oh, man. Yeah, I guess maybe that how tough you can be on yourself about knowing if you make the right decision or not, and if the decision was the correct decision for that situation. And I mean that for everything. Your interaction with your crew. Did you say that right? Because you don't realize this is like a family, and you could say something to really offend somebody, and then they think completely different of you, which it's like, man, I wish you guys wouldn't think different of me because of that. Or did I do the right thing as the paramedic or the firefighter for that patient? And then you're sitting in your bed. When I got in the fire service, I never knew that I would get mentally eaten up so much from call to call, or just the interactions with your crews. I think it's just, is it manageable? 100%, but is it hard? It is hard. That is very hard to go home and sit in your bed after a call and stare at the ceiling for 2 hours sometimes.
Especially if, like you say, with the best of intentions, sometimes you don't always get a successful outcome, and you can go in 1,000 different directions about, if I'd have done this differently, or it would have been 5 minutes earlier, 5 minutes later, if I'd have known the right locker to get the kit out of, I'd have saved that bit of time. You can really torment yourself.
Totally. That's the curse of when I talk to people a lot, and they're like, man, you must have it so rough because you got to go into all these fires or whatever it is. And I try to think in my mind, none of that really bothers me. What bothers me is the constant rerun of what you could have done different to save that bit of time. Like you said, even just, man, I screwed up and I didn't even go to the right compartment. That all those things eat you up sometimes.
What's a common piece of advice that you think people should ignore when they come in the fire service? The generic thing that you hear people say that you just think, you know what, that's BS.
Oh, that's an easy one for me. And that's just the comment that keeps coming up all the time is that's just the way we've always done it because that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That is not the fire service. And in fact, has never been the fire service for years. We've always said inconsistency is the most consistent thing you're going to see in the fire service, right? Because it's changing constantly. It doesn't matter if the vehicles are changing. It doesn't matter if you want to look at the structures are changing, just how they're built, and also the furnishings. I mean, it's globally how the fire service is changing, trying to tell somebody, especially a new person coming into the fire service, that that's just the way it's always been is the worst statement we can make to those individuals coming up. So I wish that statement would leave everybody's mind.
Yeah, because like you said, the only constant now is change. That's the irony of it. We are just going to keep going through those iterations. So you have to be married to the process of change, but not married to any one specific idea. Because if you try and tie yourself to an idea and be so proud of it because you think it's your idea, then it has to be the only way to do it. You've got to be able to be open to science is a great example, because the beauty of science is that the purpose is to prove and consistently disprove theories and find new iterations and new developments and sort of new ways of looking at things. And
that's exactly it. Just being humble and embracing what's coming our direction rather than fight it, because there is no reason to, right? We're just supposed to enjoy our day. We love being in the fire service. Anybody who's a firefighter loves it, and just embrace it, have fun with it. And as these things come up, take the time to learn it from somebody who's willing to teach it to you, because that person who's willing to teach it to you is doing it because they care about it and they love it. And so, you know, I wish that was looked at a little bit more often from some of the more senior people, but the senior people sometimes don't want to hear from the junior people. So I know, I always think that's so sad, because that's where all the experience and that's where all of the knowledge is held up. And, you know, they're often the ones that get frustrated with newbies coming into the services and their relentless eagerness, but they are just like, they're just a bucket. They are ready to be poured into with all of your wealth of knowledge. And if you're the solution as well, do you know what I mean? The people with the experience, they are the solution to the problem that so many of these recruits are facing. And they'll stop annoying you as soon as you start teaching them how to do it the right way. And they want to learn, you know what I mean? They're eager, but you've just got to get over yourself and get back out there and get on the pumps and get in the appliance bay and teach people and show people and get the kit off and go through the basics. Totally. And that can even go, for me, I see that all the way up into the chief level, right? Because with all respect to our chiefs do great jobs out there. I think globally they're all doing what they know best. But at the same time, they forget the simple stuff. And the simple stuff is when you got firefighters below you that are maybe super junior to you, but have a wealth of knowledge to give you or your organization, you have to let them in. It's like, let the bird fly, you know, that comment, because if you don't, then that bird will sit on a branch for the rest of his life or her life. And that branch, they'll never leave, and that branch will never change. And so for me, chiefs have all the ability in the world to empower their individuals, to empower their organization, but sometimes they forget to look at the people that are sitting in the back seat, right? Because I hear the comment a lot, well, you're just a back seater. You're just a back step firefighter. That's what we call the people who ride backwards in the United States. Yeah. And to me, I feel that is one of the most horrible statements to be made, because if it was my organization, my thought, again, this is just a thought, would be who runs this organization is my backstep people, because they're the ones that are most innovated. They're the ones that are going to all these trainings. They have the most current, up-to-date information. I want them telling me what policy to write. Yeah. Let them tell me what I need to implement into my fire service. Yeah. But as we go up the chain of command, we seem to forget those individuals. And in fact, they almost look bad upon them. Oh, you're still sitting backwards? When are you going to promote? Yeah. When are you going to do this? Instead of being like, hey, thanks for riding backwards for 15 years. You know, we need those people. What do you? They're the bloodstream of the fire service. Do you know what I mean? And people forget sometimes it's our responsibility to take responsibility. It's not our responsibility to make all of the decisions. It's not our responsibility to be right as officers. You know,
It's for us to remove the barriers and to harness and support the development, but also the knowledge that sits within those, those people that are sitting on the back, because that is the bloodstream. And just because their personal circumstances or their personal decisions is that they don't want to pursue development and or promotion in that sense, but development is lateral. We talk about the company that you run. Next Level Education is about development laterally. This is for firefighters and crew leaders and stuff like that who want to get better at the job they're at, not necessarily to go and get promoted. And if everybody could just focus on being better in the job they're in rather than trying to climb up the greasy pole sometimes, I think we'd be in a much better position.
Totally. And then when they get to those positions of being an officer, I think it's great that you rode backwards for this long and you went to all these classes and did all these things, because as that firefighter, you've experienced stuff to now sit in the front seat and do exactly what you said. Be there for your backseaters and be there to support them and facilitate what they need as they want to move forward now. And that just leaves a lot of times. They go to the front seat after 5 years on the job and they're like, they think they deserve it, but then there's been nothing done in the back seat that entire time to learn it.
That's the whole illusion of time. Sometimes people think, oh, I've been doing this for 5 years. You haven't been anywhere. Do you know what I mean? If you haven't had the jobs, you're not going to have got that development. Time doesn't always equate to, tangible experience. You could have been on a nowhere station having one call a month. Do you know what I mean? And a bit of nothing of significance. So, just having been there doesn't mean that you've picked up that experience. You need to be humble enough to put yourself into situations where you can get that development, like going out and seeking these sort of courses and seeking that development that is going to be outside of your comfort zone, sometimes outside of your city, outside of your state. It is your personal development at the end of the day. The word personal is at the front of it. You've got to drive it. You can't just stand there and throw your arms up at your organization and say, why are they not developing me? It's your development. You've got to develop yourself, and people are there to support you, I promise.
Totally. And with the future, the way that these vehicles are going, that's a prime example of it, right? Like if we know that there's a significant change coming, then putting yourself through classes like this is putting you in that right direction to implement change as an officer when you do promote one day. But to say to yourself, I'm going to ride backwards and I don't really care about this EV stuff. I don't care about electric vehicle electrification or whether they catch on fire or not. I hear this comment a lot. Well, there's not a lot of them out there, so it's not a problem right now. It's like, okay. I mean, that's a pretty weird statement, but duly noted. I won't talk about it around that person anymore.
Yeah. You'll wait till they turn up and experience it for the worst case scenario, and hopefully it doesn't result in them injuring themselves or them being unable to carry out a rescue efficiently and it costing a member of the community's life, just for them to then turn around and go, we need to come up with a training package for this, or we need to come up with a development policy for this. That's exactly what we've been talking about.
Totally. I started using these chains they're specifically designed in the tow industry, and I started using these chains because they have big foundry hooks on them. They have like a total of it's hard to explain, but the reason these chains were implemented into the fire service from the towing industry was that you can use them to pull vehicles out of the garages when they're on fire, because that's what I truly believe is when they catch on fire, now you have an actual garage fire with an EV, you just hook up to this vehicle, either throw in these foundry hooks through the back Charlie's side window, and you just pull it straight out, put out the garage fire, and then deal with that thing later. Well, it's funny because when I try to implement that into some of my trainings, the responses that you get from people are, that won't work, or it's almost an instant shutdown thing. Or why we don't need these right now to be put on the rigs right now. Why would we put them on the rigs right now? There's not even that many EVs out there. And it's like, all right.
Yeah.
It's like that.
But that's so small-minded as well, because it's another resource that you've got. Every tool on the fire engine is going to serve more than one function.
Totally. And this same thing, that's what I tried to sell to these individuals, was that exact same setup can be used in a tie-back situation for stabilization, where you tie the vehicle on the dirty side back to your struts. So you get a multi-purpose out of these things. They're just on the rig for also the future of maybe some EVs that light on fire in the garage. But the fire service that we're in right now, when you try to show these people, like we were talking about, the old timers, they, with respectfully great experience, they just don't want that change. So they don't want a new chain. They don't want to try to implement this tieback system. They don't want to try to implement towing a vehicle out of the garage. They don't think it's going to be a problem in their lifetime. So it's not going to be a sale to them. And
I always say really passionate people like that is sometimes the barrier. It sounds ironic because passionate people are both the ones that are going to move us forwards, but some of the passionate, well-educated, well-experienced people are the biggest barrier if they are in that fixed mindset of it is the way it's always been.
Totally, man. It's crazy to me.
Well, look, man, we appreciate what you're doing, and we love what you're doing with this, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us today. I don't want us to go without giving people the information, and I know we're going to put it in the notes below anyway, but what's the best way for people, or how would you prefer people to be able to reach out if they wanted to go over to a channel, or if they wanted to go and find or view or learn a little bit more about what you're doing? What's the best way for them to do that?
Obviously, social media is a great platform for me just because of comments. You can go to my Facebook page at Next Level Extrication. You can go to Instagram. I'm on all of those things. Anytime people write comments that are relative to me being able to answer it, sometimes it's people just arguing, but and that's fine. That's fine. But if they're good questions, I get on there. I try to answer them for them. I'm always open to phone calls. If I have the time, I respect everybody out there and want to try to get an answer to them. So you can always call me, and that's on my Facebook as well. You can email me at nextlevelextrication@gmail.com. That works as well. And if you want a class or something like that, I travel everywhere to teach classes. I mean, all the way down into Chile. Most of my classes are around the United States, but I fly everywhere teaching classes.
Jesus,
and so,
dude, that's got to take such a colossal commitment of time. I mean, even just with the podcast, we're lucky we can do some of this virtually sometimes, but just traveling around the UK is hard enough for us. We get invited to the States and Canada and Germany and places like that, but I'm just like, dude, I've got to find the time, because like you say, you've still got your normal day-to-day job as well, and you find yourself coming off night shifts, and then you're off on the train or off trying to travel off somewhere else. It's a massive demand, so I really admire you doing that.
Well, I appreciate it. But you're helping me out as well, right? And the main reason is because when I got into this in the first place was just because I want to help the fire service out. I want to get them the right information. I want us to be ready for it. And for 6 years, I did it for free. I didn't even charge $1. And so now,
don't be doing that. Don't do that anymore, because you end up just becoming a withered wreck. I did that with a few things before, and eventually, and it's that imposter syndrome. You know, what you do and the value that you add is really important. It's really, really important, and it's very valuable. So it's difficult. I appreciate that, and I know your courses of people charge, and you subscribe to them, and they come on them, but. Yeah, 100%. I don't want to encourage people to be the busy fool.
No, totally. And now I do charge, but a platform like this, the reason I like it is I can't be everywhere at once, but this platform that we're doing today will hopefully touch several firefighters out there and encourage them to reach out to training, whether they go through me or they find something to get their training. All we want and all we're looking for in this industry is that people are just prepared. And that's the big push. And this allows me to touch, hopefully, thousands of firefighters and get them to start focusing on these new tactical changes we're going to see with EVs and EV fires. So
thousands, buddy, honestly. And that's what I love most about the podcast. With the greatest respect to a lot of American fire departments, there's some great podcasts over there, but they tend to stick only to their American audiences. Whereas for better or worse, I try and diversify as much as we can. And I would encourage people to do exactly what you said, to go over and have a look on the platforms. Facebook especially, you share a lot of really valuable content, a lot of really good tips and tricks for people to go away and utilize on their stations. And then, like you say, it's ideal for people to just connect, whether it's via Zoom, Teams, or whatever, and book in those one-to-ones to go a little bit deeper. So I really appreciate you taking the time, my man. We've literally gone for like an hour and 45 there with no break, and I love that. It's a testament to the passion that you have for this subject matter. So I really appreciate your time, brother.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a great experience, and hopefully we can connect later. Maybe if you're
I've got to get over there. I've got to get over there at some point. We've had that many invites, because what I'd love to do with the podcast is also visit people's stations and do those like crew talks, where you've got 3 or 4 people talking about their experiences, and we are 100% going to make a tour of the States at some point, maybe next year, because we've got about 5 locations of different individuals that we've had on the podcast that just insist we come over and do some sort of physical fire challenge and also do some interviews and some podcasts together. So we'll add you to the list, man. I would really love that. And we will put your links in the podcast below, and we'll also feature them on the website for anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about it. If they forget whereabouts to reach out to Next Level Extrication, all of those details will be in there.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Brother, thank you so much for that. Look after yourself. Send my love to the family, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Sounds good. You too.
All right. See you, mate.
The Firefighters Podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.